Now, Paul Keating's just arrived at the news conference live from Parliament House. Let's take it now.
Thanks, sir. Just try again.
Oh, both sides. Right, I'll turn this over because you know what you guys like. Good. One for the front? Okay. There's so many of you. Thank you.
Keating,
Right.
just swing right in the front.
This one here, please. Last one. Thank
Go
you.
on it. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Well, could I begin by saying that I'm very greatly honoured and more than a little nervous at the great responsibility the Labor Party has entrusted to me tonight. The first thing I'd like to do is to pay tribute to my predecessor, Bob Hawke, who has been a great leader of the Labor Party, who's won an unequalled, unparalleled 4 consecutive election victories, an electoral record I will never match and few of us could ever hope to match, and who, in partnership with me and our party, has changed the way in which Australia is and the way in which it works. And I speak on behalf of the whole of the Parliamentary Labor Party today in thanking Bob for his leadership, for the way in which he conducted himself today with the dignity and the pluck in the House and at his press conference, and having led Labor to victory, he's lost a ballot in the manner of his choosing in the caucus of the Parliamentary Labor Party, and he has shown great credit, I believe, to himself in the way in which he's conducted himself as Prime Minister and to the Labor Party as a government. Could I, in my first words to, as Prime Minister-elect, leader of the Labor Party-elect, to you, the Australian people, say that I make 3 commitments. First is, I pledge to give everything I've got to the job in the country. The second is to deal honestly with the people, to tell them the truth. In tough times, of course, the temptation is always to gild the lily. I'll be resisting that temptation as much as it's humanly possible. I'll speak honestly with them, to them, and realistically, and I'll listen accordingly. The third commitment is I pledge to fight the battle against unemployment and for economic recovery with all of the energy I can muster. I promise never to turn a blind eye to the suffering that some are enduring, and never to agree that it is acceptable for some Australians to be written off or sacrificed in the so-called national interest. I want each Australian to have the opportunity to pursue with dignity and hope a fair share of our national prosperity. So they're the 3 commitments I give. In the next few weeks, I've got these important tasks: to restore unity and harmony to the government, because it would be futile to deny that the recent past has been a somewhat traumatic experience for all of us. It's imperative that we're now all pulling in the same direction, and for my part, of course, need I say, there will be no recriminations whatsoever, no raking over old ground, but only a commitment to get on with the task of governing this country. Over the holiday period, I will spend time talking to my colleagues and working on proposals I want to put before the Cabinet in the early new year. I would like to start 1992 with a cohesive and comprehensive plan to push Australia ahead. I've got a good idea already of what should be in that plan, what should be done, but I want to tie it all together and make sure we have it right. But I suppose even with that and above all that, the thing that the government, I and the government, must do in the immediate period ahead is get confidence in Australia going again, to get the country moving, to try and engender confidence in the community, confidence in the business community, and get the country cracking. While the economy is now much too weak and unemployment much too high, I believe we can emerge from this recession a much stronger economy than ever before. This period gives us great opportunities, and the 90s hold for Australia very great promise indeed. So could I conclude on this point by saying that I will need the help of the Australian people, their understanding and their patience, as indeed I will need it from you. But in time, I hope that I can earn their trust and their patience and their support, both as leader of the party and for and on behalf of the party and the government. Thank you.
Mr. Keating, do you expect a big cabinet reshuffle?
Well, I do not believe that there should be any spill of positions in the Labor Party. I think it's very important for harmony that that not be so. And I'd like some time to think about the portfolio responsibilities, the ministerial arrangements, the portfolio responsibilities that should obtain, and naturally the people who should fill them.
What about Ralph Willis as Treasurer?
Well, that goes for everybody.
Respond to speculation that he would now seek a mandate from the Australian people and take Australia to an early election.
Well, I don't know. I've never heard that speculation. I've got to give you marks for trying there, though.
10,000 unemployed people, what are you going to do to get their confidence?
Well, along with Bob and the government, I spent 7.5 of my 8.5 years trying to engender employment growth into this economy. And we inherited 10.5% unemployment in 1983, and we brought it down sharply through the 80s. And it's a matter of profound regret to me that employment was overtaken by a rise in unemployment, and the result is that there's been a substantial level of misery in the community as a result. I want to go back to doing what we do best, that is creating jobs and making the Australian economy grow, but doing it in a way which preserves the great gains on inflation, doing it in a way which advantages all Australians.
Mr. Hawke spoke a few minutes ago about the need for new directions in economic policy. Do you think that's right?
Well, I think governments have a substantial pride in the authorship of their policies, and we're entitled to be proud of the great change of Australia as an international country, and all of the things which are part and parcel of it. And I suppose it is probably a human failing, if nothing else, that governments then spend time defending their structure, defending their policy, and not be as alert to the shifts which they ought to be making. And I think policy dexterity and keeping alert to those shifts is going to be important. I agree with Bob about that. But again, we're not talking about putting policy on its head. We're not talking about taking Australia back to the closed days of the 50s, 60s and 70s. We're talking about policy which is going to make Australia fairer, better, with more growth and more employment, but at the same time keeping that great historic change into an international society.
Mr. Keating, are you worried about blowing out the deficit and boosting interest rates? I mean, are you talking about massive jobs and crying a lot of money?
Well, Tom, as I said, part of the framework of my views were sketched out in a speech I made at the Collingwood Football Club a month or two ago. But, and I have got a framework in my mind, but I'd like to put that to the Cabinet and the caucus. I think that's the right place to put it. And so rather than get into any detail, that's what I prefer to do.
You sound like the recession Australia had to have.
It's one of the statements I made as Treasurer I regret, because it did not reflect the government's policy, and it was a statement which seemed too uncaring at the time. The government was never after a recession. Policy was only about a slowdown. You remember at the time we were spending twice what we were producing. We were spending twice what we were producing. The economy had to be slowed, and I had the job as Treasurer of inducing that slowdown. We never wanted a recession, and it's a pity that the recession we now have is deeper than any of us would have wanted it to be or needed to be.
Wasn't uncaring?
So it was a shorthand way on my part of trying to describe the slowdown, but I think an inadequate one, because, as I say, you can never consign Australians to the misery of unemployment believing that there's a higher purpose to it. There can be no higher purpose, and therefore it's important to get the economy growing again so that what we thought policy was about back there in 1988, which was a slowdown and became a recession, quickly becomes, as quickly as we can make it happen, a recovery.
Mr. Keating, you say you're feeling humble today. Have you learnt a new humility on the backbench?
Well, I must say that I think that public life is a humbling experience for anybody who has had major responsibilities. It's a humbling experience. Can I say that I said in the caucus tonight, I enjoyed immensely the 6 months on the backbench. I found the camaraderie, the wit, the open-mindedness, the fun of many of the people there to give me a great charge. It's one of the nicest things that's happened to me in public life, is having that time there, and I think that as a result, I would be determined as a leader of the party to be more in touch with the caucus than I ever was, and we all commit the sin of moving into the cabinet processes, not consulting the caucus enough, and invariably whenever we miss a step somewhere. So it only reinforces me, in my view, that experience, which I had, a very pleasant one, means that the government must be closer to the caucus. The cabinet must be closer to the caucus.
GST package while on the backbench?
I've had a look at it. Well, look, Dr. Hewson has proposed what he believes is a plan for Australia. But it's the wrong plan. It's the wrong plan. It's a plan which is about making a 10th order issue about whether you tax income or expenditure as a first order issue, when we know, all of us, that the first order issues are employment, growth, investment, maintenance of low levels of inflation, further production, change in the workplace, enterprise bargaining, national economic efficiency. They're the first order issues. Whether you tax income or expenditure is a 10th order issue. And what Dr. Hewson has done is said, look, I'll take a 10th order issue and I'll bring it up here and try and solve it as a first order issue. Well, frankly, basically, his proposition amounts to no more than a shift of income to the wealthy at the expense of the low paid.
A vote of 56-51, is that a strong enough base on which to rebuild harmony in the party?
Well, I think so, and I took considerable heart from both what Bob said and the tone of what he said, and also what colleagues in the caucus said to me who voted for Bob. I think so. From my part, The caucus will not find me lacking in any goodwill towards them. My cabinet colleagues won't. I think we have the prospect of being a unified force. I said in the caucus that we can only succeed on a basis of friendship. And basically without that friendship, we just won't get the cohesion I think we need to come from a very long way back in the electoral stakes.
Why do you feel better equipped to lead Labor to the election in 1993 than Mr Hawke?
Well, I think, look, it is the issue of generational change. I think I could say that Bob and I conducted a government which contained two leaders. And we worked as a good team for a very long period of time, probably a record period in Australian politics for two people to work as closely and as effectively as we did. But time tells. I think it told on both of us in our work, in our relationship, and I think that the need for policy shifts, that dexterity I mentioned earlier, and generational change is important. I think it's important for a political party to change itself. After all, this is a very long period. Bob is the second longest serving Prime Minister by a very large margin. And it is a long time, and therefore I think that every person who leads a party comes with different views and perspectives, and I believe the Australian people are looking for both hope and direction for the 1990s, and this country can be in a very good position in the 1990s. Notwithstanding the fact we've got a recession, we can be well set up in the 1990s. And I believe I can play a role in that, and that's why I believe that I will serve the Labor Party well.
You've just admitted that the recession is a mistake. How can you inject confidence in the community that you won't make another mistake as momentous as that?
Well, when I say it was a mistake, I think it was not the policies we adopted were intended only to slow the economy. It unfortunately became a recession, but there were substantial contributing factors. Those factors now don't exist, and I think that if one looks at the record of the government from 1983, we engendered twice as much growth in the Australian economy in our first 7 or 8 years as in the previous 7 or 8 years. So while we've certainly had a recession, there's an enormous shift of employment and wealth there as well. So certainly the recession we didn't need, but what has come in these years of change is enormous strength and change to this economy, and I think the Labor Party and the government can be relied upon to continue that ambition for change. There's a lot in him a lot about him that's where you see the very good side of Americans, and I'm sure he'll forgive me my golf swing, and we can discuss when he arrives issues of moment and of substance to both countries and to the world.
The money markets, Mr Keating, are expecting interest rates to come down to about 7%. That's a 90-day rate. Is that part of your economic plan? Is that part of your thinking, a sharp cut in interest rates?
No, I don't want to start speaking now about what the government may consider, but all options, including monetary options, would be on the table, and I'd like to consider those in the freedom and privacy of the cabinet room in the first instance.
Would it be indicated any shifts in emphasis in the Australian-US relationship?
Well, the Australian-US relationship, I think, is a long-standing one. It's been improved, I think, by the government, by Bob Hawke's government, by Bob's relationship with President Reagan and President Bush, and I can only hope that I can maintain a relationship of that quality. I would certainly make that an ambition of mine.
Which suggested that you thought that Mr Hawke had been a little too subservient to the Americans. Will you be reflecting that in anything you said?
No, I didn't say that. I said that I made some reference to telephone calls. Look, I think that I don't think American presidents, not someone of George Bush's experience. I've met him on about 4 or 5 occasions since 1970 in various jobs. I don't think they expect any nation to do other than consider its own interests. And that's what we must always sensibly do. I mean, you've got James Baker at the moment talking to the leaders of the former Soviet states. I mean, I'm sure the Americans are very wide-eyed about national interest.
Will you be going to Jakarta next year? And more generally, what approach will you adopt with regard to Australia's relations to the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, I think Australia is an Asia-Pacific nation. And as time goes by, as we're seeing, the central focus of our trade and our foreign policy is going to be more to the Asia-Pacific area. This is obvious with the APEC arrangements, which Australia has championed, which have been adopted now by all the Pacific Basin countries, or most of the Pacific Basin countries. So therefore I regard the Asia-Pacific area as our area of interest, as our backyard, as the principal focus of economic trade and foreign policy. Well, that's I haven't thought about that.
Are you concerned about your unpopularity?
Well, it's a matter of what popularity is about. I think when we had some if you like, dissection of polls, I think there was a great discernment being shown by the public about what they expect in leaders. And they expect leaders to do things. They expect leaders to lead, to strike out. Leaders, the essence of leadership is being out there, in front. And I think that this community has a very realistic view of their situation in the 1990s. That they hope and expect for a decent life and physical and economic security, and they want governments to provide that for them. They don't want more than that, I don't think. I mean, I think they've got reasonable expectations, and I think if any leader can provide policies to meet those expectations, he or she will be approved of, and I hope in providing those, I could be approved of too.
A year ago you said Australia would never have a great leader. I presume that you think that's about to change.
No.
I just wonder what qualities of greatness you might bring to the job.
Well, that's for you to make judgments about over time, isn't it? If one would always hope one could bring any quality of greatness to such a position.
Resentment is in the community that this leadership challenge has taken place at a time that people think the government should have been concentrating on the essentials.
Well, I think we were concentrating on the essentials. It's a matter of how we concentrated on them. I wouldn't try and say that there wasn't that the first challenge wasn't a distraction for the party, but a relatively short one, and the government's largely gone about its business. And this resolution today is a couple of weeks in the making. But till then, I don't think there's been that great a distraction. I know that the party will be glad the distraction's behind it. Whatever distraction there was is behind it, and I'm glad of that too. As Bob said he was.
How great do you think resentment is in the community?
I'm sorry?
How great do you think the resentment is in the community?
I can't judge that. You're a better judge of that than I am, I think.
Would you have this challenge this week if Bob Hawke hadn't made the move he did today?
Well,
for the sake of the party?
Bob made the move, that's the point. Bob declared his position vacant, which was, I think, the right gesture for somebody of his stature as a Prime Minister of long standing, a leader of long standing, and in the position of that vacancy, I nominated.
Mr. Keating, you didn't attend question time today. Why was that?
Well, I don't. As Treasurer, of course, I always had to attend it as a rule. I've not been entirely punctual as a backbencher, and I was less punctual today.
Because it is quite embarrassing.
No, but I thought in the circumstances it was best that I wasn't there. I think it's probably right.
Do you accept, Mr. Keating, that given your position in the polls, I know what you just said, and given Mr. Hawke's legendary ability as a campaigner, that caucus has in fact taken something of a gamble with their decision today in an electoral sense?
I think they've picked up on the view in the community that the community is looking for change. If a party says, we don't think we give you any more change, they say, well, thank you, we don't need you anymore. And I think they, but as I said, not the right kind of change. Not the right kind of change. I think he's picked up on the sentiment, but not responded to it properly. Dr. Hewson, I mean.
Said that there are some decisions that you might sort of treat a bit differently these days, that having gone out into the community, you sense a different set of priorities perhaps. I mean, do you believe that the basic structural changes that the government started should continue, for example? There's a lot of resistance in the Labor movement to those changes now.
Well, the basic change is one from a closed to an open society. And I don't think there is any dispute about that within the portals of the Labor Party. And in any recession, there will always be questioning about policy stances, but I don't think anyone would now believe that our security could be enhanced in the way in which it has been in a closed place. So we can always discuss and debate how the opening of this economy and its continuation goes into the future. It's meeting the challenge of international efficiency. You can always debate those things. But I don't think the basic thing is being debated.
It's going to be a very important issue at the next election, isn't it?
I've always believed that. I think if you offer the public sensible change, we have in this country, very fortunately, a very conscientious community.
Mr. Keating, the changes you propose, will they require a mini-budget?
Sorry?
When will the abolition of the Medicare payment occur, and have you discussed it with Mr Howard?
Well, you know, I think most of you know my views about this. We considered it many times when I was Treasurer in the Expenditure Review Committee. But I will be speaking first to the ministers involved and putting my views to the Cabinet as the appropriate place to consider the matter.
Are you happy for Mr Howard to remain as your deputy?
Delighted. I think we can both help each other make the party stronger and better.
Mr Keating, the changes you propose, will they require a mini-budget? The changes you're proposing?
Well, I said I hope in 1992 to present a plan for the ongoing, a plan for change for Australia as we go through the 1990s. That will be obviously something of substance, and whether you want to give it a mini-budget tag is up to you.
Mr Keating, Mr Hawke is planning a cabinet meeting tomorrow to start producing a new plan to boost employment. Will you proceed with that?
No, I don't think any of the cabinet think tomorrow would be the appropriate day to start.
Decision today is a couple of weeks in the making. How much responsibility do you bear personally for the turbulence that has virtually crippled the government over the last couple of weeks?
Well, until a few minutes ago, I haven't made a public comment since the 8th of November. And I think I can say that if the government had been able to respond more fulsomely to the opposition's consumption tax package, then the likelihood of this matter being debated before Christmas would have been remote. I can say to you that in the last session of Parliament, when it finished, my expectation was we would go away for Christmas and we'd come back here on the 25th of February. And those events changed that, I think. Well, I'll be taking some advice on that, but I think it will end during 1992. But it's not very wise of me, I think, to try and be precise about the point, or to be clever about it, because I don't think it's easy to be clever about picking the turning points in any economy.
If the government's attack on the GST was unforeseen, why didn't you help them over the last few years?
Well, it was up, I think, for... It's not really, I think, an acceptable argument for a backbencher to say that in the initial phases of the presentation of such a package and the requirement on the government to respond to it, that I should have been out there, if you like, putting a view, and also one without the support that comes with ministerial office. So it was properly the job of the government, of the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, and I recognise that.
Do you believe the fight back has carried you into the Prime Ministership?
I don't. It's caused a debate in our party about our direction and our leadership, which may have led to the events of today, but so what, you know, in terms of the package?
Party under Mr Hawke came under fairly heavy criticism for pandering to sectional interests and lobby groups. Now, do you see any shift in emphasis there?
Well, I think the Hawke government, one of its hallmarks was a consensus approach to Australian society. And it's because of that approach we were able to do many more policy things and changes more rapidly than could ever have been undertaken by a government taking a confrontationist approach. In the course of those discussions, people may say we're subject to lobbying. Well, if a government's listening and a government's responsive, I don't think the public can complain of that. I think it's a very good sign, and I think it changed the way in which Australian politics worked.
Are there any other decisions such as the Medicare co-payments policy that you'd be looking to review quite soon?
None that comes to mind.
Mr Keating, will you be asking Mr Hawke any advice?
From time to time I may well do. He made me the offer very kindly and I'll very happily take it up.
Would you like to see him remain on the backbench?
Well, I think it's a matter for Bob, but he can remain there at his own pleasure.
Is he future Governor General?
You should have asked him that. That's a question for him.
Thanks very much, Max.
Thank you. Could I, before I go again, thank you. I want to just conclude on this point by thanking the Parliamentary Labor Party for supporting me today, those who did and those who didn't. But I also thank my wife who has supported me through these years and through these times of difficulty, and my family. For without that kind of support, it's not possible to do a public job like these under this sort of pressure. But most particularly, I thank the Australian people for having the forbearance to see the Labor Party change its leadership, and I hope the patience to see us change our policies as needs be to take Australia to a better future in the 1990s. Thank you.
Well, that was Prime Minister-elect Paul Keating promising to give it his best shot, to deal honestly with the Australian people, to listen closely to them, and to fight the battle against unemployment. In case you've missed events earlier this evening, after 8 years, 9 months and 8 days as Prime Minister, Bob Hawke earlier tonight lost the caucus showdown with Paul Keating, 56 votes to 51. After that, remarkable scenes outside the Prime Minister's office, staff there in tears, people hugging each other, in extraordinary emotion. Then a news conference from the Prime Minister, another extraordinary event, a news conference that went from laughter to tears, and all the time the Prime Minister putting on an immensely brave face and showing an enormous amount of style. Then the Prime Minister, just before this press conference by Paul Keating, out to Government House, and as he left Government House, inevitably well wishes there to say goodbye.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, Bob. Merry Christmas.
G'day.
Okay, well, all the best, mate.
Thank you very much indeed.
Good luck, eh?
Thank you. G'day.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Thank
you for the wonderful 10 or 11 years.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Say to the Governor General.
Happy Christmas.
Okay.
What did you say to the Governor General?
Happy Christmas. Okay.
Good on you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We owe you a hell of a lot, mate.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Merry Christmas.
We owe you, Bob.
Okay, mate. Thank you.
Well, he said at his news conference earlier tonight, asked how he'd like to be remembered. He said as the sort of bloke who wasn't really changed by high office, a bloke who was always a dinkum Aussie, and I think like him or love him or hate him, you can't deny that he's always been that. Well, that's it for tonight, an extraordinary night here at Parliament House. Don't forget Late Line at 10:30 with a lot more analysis, a lot more detail. Until then, I'll return you to normal programming.